The cameras were already rolling when the silence hit like thunder. A packed hall at Georgetown University, students, survivors, reporters, every seat taken, every eye locked on the stage. At the center sat Donald Trump, invited under the guise of open dialogue. Across from him, Denzel Washington, not as an actor but as a citizen armed with truth. The tension was volcanic before a word was spoken. Then came the spark. From the front row, a woman stood. Her voice trembled but didn't break. "I was 15 when Epstein's circle destroyed my life," she said. The air froze. Phones tilted up, pens scratched paper, and the nation leaned in. Trump shifted, the smirk he wore like armor thinning with every syllable. He cleared his throat, ready to drown her in deflection. But before he could, Denzel leaned forward, his eyes steel, his tone surgical. "Don't even try it, Donald," he said. "Not this time. Not with her." Gasps cracked the air. Trump chuckled nervously, muttering about fake stories and political setups. But the crowd wasn't buying it. Not tonight. Denzel's voice cut through again, low and deliberate. "These survivors are not props. They are proof. And the more you laugh, the more America sees the fear you're hiding." The room didn't erupt, it combusted. Students shot to their feet. Survivors locked eyes with the man who once hid behind power. And for the first time in years, Donald Trump looked small, cornered, stripped of his script. Denzel hadn't raised his voice. He didn't need to. Truth, once spoken, carried louder than any rally chant. And in that silence after the blast, the question wasn't whether Trump would answer. It was whether he could. Trump reached for the old playbook, smirk, shrug, steamroll. "I don't know this person," he said, eyes skating past the survivor as if she were a heckler instead of a human. "It's another political hit. Very unfair. Very staged." The line fell with a dull thud. No rally music, no friendly crowd to catch it. A few scattered coughs, a camera click, the soft hum of the HVAC, every small sound suddenly sounded like doubt. Denzel didn't blink. He angled his mic toward the front row. "You have the floor," he told the woman. "Finish what you started." She inhaled, steadied. "I remember the room," she said. "I remember the chandelier. I remember being told to smile." Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. "I also remember every man who looked away." Trump tried to interrupt. "Objection, this isn't court," but Denzel's palm rose, not to silence him, but to anchor the moment. "You wanted dialogue," he said, calm but unyielding. "Dialogue means listening when it's hardest." A second survivor stood. A grad student lifted her phone to live stream. The hall tilted toward testimony. "I was told powerful men don't get held accountable," the survivor said. "That's the rule." She turned to Trump, not pleading, not shouting. "If that's strength, why does it hide behind mockery?" Trump's jaw tightened. "Lies. All of it." His fingers drummed the table, uneven. "These people are coached." Denzel slid a folder forward, dates, flight logs, depositions, timelines. He didn't wave it, he let it sit. "Facts don't need coaching," he said. "They just need daylight." A murmur rolled through the audience, anger, grief, something like relief. A student in the balcony called down, "Let them finish." Another voice, "We're listening." Trump pivoted to a familiar refuge. "What about cities? Crime? Borders? Real issues?" Denzel's answer was a scalpel. "There is nothing more real than a human being telling you what was done to them," he said. "You talk about walls. They talk about the rooms you refuse to remember." Silence, thick, living, settled over the stage. The first survivor stepped closer to the mic. "I used to think my voice was small," she said. "Tonight, I don't." She looked past the cameras to the rows of students. "And if mine isn't small, neither is yours." Trump's eyes darted to the exits, to the cameras, to Denzel. The old certainty wasn't in reach. Denzel didn't press the advantage, he widened it. "We're going to hear 3 more, he said. "Then you can respond. Not with slogans. With an answer." For once, the room moved on without Trump. He had not been muted, he had been outgrown. The third survivor stood, her voice sharper than the silence that preceded her. She didn't need notes. She didn't need proof in a folder. Her proof was her presence, her courage to speak in front of the very man who once loomed untouchable. You built an empire on intimidation, she said, eyes locked on Trump. But intimidation only works when people stay quiet. Tonight, we're not quiet. The hall leaned forward. Students clutched their phones tighter, live streams exploding across social media feeds. Hashtags lit up within seconds, hashtag we hear you, hashtag truth over power. Trump's face flickered with annoyance. He snapped back, this is a setup. You're all actors. This is political theater. His hands chopped the air, desperate to command the moment. But Denzel didn't flinch. He leaned into his mic, voice low but volcanic. Donald, the only theater here is watching you squirm under the weight of stories you can't erase. These women don't need a script, they lived it. The audience roared, not like fans at a rally, but like a collective exhale that had been held for too long. Survivors nodded, one resting a steadying hand on another's shoulder. Their strength was contagious. The more Trump tried to drown them out, the more the crowd filled the silence with belief. Cameras zoomed in, catching every twitch in Trump's jaw, every bead of sweat crawling along his temple. He muttered about fake news and Democrat traps, but his words landed limp. Denzel pressed further, not with rage but with scalpel precision. You always say America first, he said. Then look America in the eyes and tell them why survivors don't count as part of it. The challenge hung like a verdict. For the first time in decades of spectacle, Trump had no applause line, no chant to rescue him. The survivors weren't just speaking, they were rewriting the rules of power live, on camera, with the nation watching. And in the center of it all, Denzel made sure their voices rang louder than any excuse. Trump leaned forward, trying to reclaim control. His voice boomed through the mic, this is a witch hunt. A disgrace. Nobody has been treated worse than me, nobody. And you, Denzel, you're just here to score points, not to tell the truth. He slammed his palm on the table, the echo sharp against marble walls. For a moment, he tried to look strong, but the crowd wasn't swayed. Murmurs rolled across the hall like waves crashing against a brittle wall. Denzel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words were scalpel precise, every syllable cutting through Trump's theatrics. Strength isn't pounding a desk, Donald. Strength is facing pain without running from it. Strength is listening when every instinct tells you to silence. That's what leadership is. Not fear in a red tie, yelling to drown out the truth. The survivors lifted their heads higher. One whispered, yes, under her breath. Another wiped her cheek, not in shame, but in defiance. The audience caught fire, their energy no longer passive. They weren't watching, they were participating. Every phone screen broadcasted not just a confrontation, but a reckoning. Trump's eyes darted around the room, searching for an ally, for some foothold. But the cameras weren't his allies anymore. They zoomed in mercilessly, capturing his twitching hands, his forced grin, the cracks in a mask worn too long. Then Denzel leaned forward, his tone steady as steel. You call this theater? Then understand this, the curtain just fell, and the act you've been playing for decades is finally over. The hall detonated in applause. It wasn't just clapping, it was release, fury, solidarity, the sound of chains breaking in real time. Survivors embraced, students raised fists, reporters typed furiously. For once, history wasn't being whispered. It was being shouted, recorded, immortalized. And in that uproar, Trump sat still, the spotlight no longer his to command. The stage had shifted, and Denzel had made sure it would never shift back. The chaos in the hall didn't fade, it deepened. Survivors stood taller, their testimonies woven into a collective force that felt unstoppable. One woman, with steady eyes and a scar that needed no explanation, spoke into the mic. For years, men like you hid behind power. You mocked, you denied, you silenced. But silence doesn't last forever. Tonight is proof. The audience was no longer just observing, they were participating in history. Students shouted encouragement from the balconies, their voices echoing like chants in a stadium. Phones streamed every second, comments pouring in live, "We believe you. Stay strong. Trump is finished." Trump leaned back, trying to smirk, but the mask cracked. His voice wavered, "These are just stories. No evidence. I've done more for women than anyone." He gestured wildly, searching for applause that never came. Instead, the crowd hissed, a wave of disapproval that drowned out his words. That was when Denzel struck again, his voice sharp as a gavel. "You keep saying you've done more for women. But here they are, women who lived what you're trying to erase. If you've done so much, why do they have to fight this hard just to be heard?" The hall went electric. A senator in the audience leaned forward, eyes narrowed, scribbling notes. Reporters exchanged glances, they knew they weren't just covering an event, but a turning point. Trump's shoulders slumped, just slightly, but enough for the cameras to catch. He muttered about fake media and deep state, but the words sounded tired, worn, stripped of their old venom. And then Denzel did what no one expected. He stepped back, giving the mic to the youngest survivor in the room, a girl barely in her 20s, her voice trembling but unbreakable. "We're not afraid of you anymore," she said, looking directly at Trump. "And if we're not afraid, then your power is gone." The audience erupted, not in outrage, but in thunderous, unanimous applause. It was no longer just a debate. It was a verdict. The roar of the hall rolled like a tidal wave, impossible to contain. Trump tried to lift his hands, commanding quiet, but the gesture looked hollow, an emperor demanding loyalty in a kingdom that had already revolted. The survivors weren't shrinking. They were multiplying in strength, voices rising not in chaos but in harmony. One survivor leaned into the mic, her voice calm but razor-sharp. "You always said, 'Make America great again.' But for who, Donald? For the men who looked the other way? For the ones who called our pain an inconvenience?" Her words sliced the air. The audience didn't clap this time, they held still, reverent, letting every syllable sink deep. Trump barked back, louder now, desperation replacing confidence. "This is unfair. This is a trap. Nobody has been treated more unfairly than me. I'm the victim here." His voice cracked on the last word. Cameras caught it. Phones streamed it. The narrative shifted in real time, Trump claiming victimhood while survivors stood unflinching before him. Denzel seized the moment. He didn't shout. He didn't sneer. He stood tall, voice steady as iron. "Victims don't get invited to the stage to silence others. Victims don't mock pain on live TV. And victims don't hide behind excuses while survivors are standing right here demanding truth." The audience erupted again, but this time it wasn't wild. It was focused, like a verdict delivered. Survivors turned to each other, some crying, others gripping hands, all of them lifted by the weight of what had just been spoken. Trump's eyes darted to his notes, to his team at the edge of the stage, but no lifeline came. For the first time, he was naked in front of the American public, not untouchable, not invincible, just a man cornered by truth. Denzel stepped forward, his tone now a final strike. "The difference between power and leadership is simple. Power hides. Leadership listens. And tonight, the whole world sees which one you've chosen." The silence that followed wasn't emptiness. It was confirmation. The crowd had already chosen who to believe. The camera zoomed closer, capturing every twitch on Trump's face as the weight of Denzel's words sank in. His jaw clenched, his fingers gripped the podium, and for the first time in years, he looked cornered, not by prosecutors, not by politicians, but by survivors and a single man's unshakable clarity. The survivors didn't just stand silently anymore. One after another, they raised their voices. A woman in a navy blazer spoke first, we begged for help, and you turned us into jokes. Another followed, her tone colder, you defended Epstein when we were children, and you called us liars. The hall vibrated with murmurs, some horrified, others shocked that the confrontation was unfolding live on national television. Trump's signature smirk faltered. He tried to mask it with anger, slamming his palm onto the podium. This is slander. Lies from broken people with an agenda. The words detonated like dynamite, but not the way he intended. Gasps echoed. Some supporters in the crowd lowered their MAGA hats, no longer clapping. Survivors stiffened, their resolve hardening into steel. And Denzel? He didn't even blink. Broken, he said, stepping into the light where every camera could catch him. His voice rose, not in volume, but in depth. Broken are the leaders who look at suffering and see inconvenience. Broken are the men who call courage a conspiracy. These women aren't broken. They're unbreakable. The line hit like thunder. The audience erupted, cheers, claps, even shouts of, "Listen to them." Trump's attempts at interruption drowned under the wave. And then, a single voice from the back of the hall, trembling but clear, cut through everything, "I was 14. The hall fell silent instantly. All eyes turned toward the speaker, a woman in her late 30s, her hands shaking, but her presence commanding. She lifted a photo above her head, a faded snapshot of herself as a child. Trump's face drained of color. His lips parted, but no words came. Denzel stepped back, allowing her the floor. "This," she said into the microphone, her voice breaking but strong, "is who you mocked. This is who you tried to erase. And tonight, you don't get to." The silence that followed was unbearable, heavy, eternal. For once, Trump's voice wasn't the loudest in the room. The cameras caught every flicker of Trump's face as he shuffled his notes, desperate to regain control. He opened his mouth to speak, but the crowd was no longer his. The survivors, once scattered shadows, now stood like a wall of truth. Reporters in the back leaned forward, typing furiously, broadcasting every second across the world. Trump finally snapped, pointing at the woman holding the faded photo. "She's lying. This is staged, a setup by the radical left." And Denzel, his voice cracked into a yell, "You're nothing but their actor." It was meant to sting, to belittle. But instead, it hung in the air like poison. The audience didn't erupt in applause, they recoiled. Even some of Trump's loyalists muttered uneasily. The mask of dominance was slipping. Denzel stepped forward again, slow and measured, every move deliberate. He didn't raise a finger or a fist. He just looked Trump dead in the eye. "An actor," he said, his voice steady. "No. I'm a witness. A witness to courage, to pain, and to the truth you keep running from. And let me tell you something, America doesn't need another script of excuses. It needs accountability." The room shivered. Applause burst from the center rows, not loud at first, but spreading, wave after wave, until even the walls seemed to vibrate. Phones shot up. Hashtags exploded online, hashtag truth over power, hashtag unbreakable voices. Trump tried again, but every word seemed weaker, thinner, as if the air itself refused to carry them. The survivors didn't sit down. They stood taller, stronger, as though his insults had only fueled them. And then Denzel turned slightly, not to Trump, but to the cameras. His voice lowered, intimate, heavy. "This isn't about him anymore. It's about them. It's about every survivor who has ever been told to be quiet, to move on, to forget. Tonight, we don't forget. Tonight, we make sure the world remembers." Gasps. Applause. And then, silence. The kind of silence that means a nation is listening. The silence lingered like a held breath, stretching across the hall, through the cameras, into living rooms across America. Survivors' faces shone with tears, but also with something fiercer: vindication. For once, the story wasn't buried under sound bites or partisan spin. It was raw, undeniable. Trump tried to rally, his voice strained. These people are liars, bought and paid for. They don't represent real America. But even as he shouted, his words collided with the storm he had unleashed. From the second row, a veteran in uniform stood up slowly. His voice was gravelly, steady. "I fought for this country. And real America doesn't mock survivors. Real America listens." The crowd roared in agreement, and Trump's retort died in his throat. The survivors moved closer together, standing shoulder to shoulder like a fortress. Behind them, the woman with the faded childhood photo lifted it high once more. Flashbulbs lit up, catching her image, immortalizing the moment. It wasn't just a picture anymore, it was evidence, a symbol, a weapon of truth. And in that instant, Trump looked smaller than he ever had. Not because he lacked words, but because his words had lost their power. They no longer commanded fear. They no longer bent the room to his will. Denzel, sensing the moment's gravity, stepped one pace forward. His voice carried a finality that wrapped around every ear, every screen. "You can shout all you want, Donald. But the louder you yell, the clearer it becomes, you're not silencing them. You're exposing yourself. History won't remember the noise. It will remember the truth." The hall erupted. Survivors embraced. Strangers clapped until their hands burned. Online, millions clipped the moment, labeling it "the night the voices won." And for the first time in years, the stage wasn't Trump's anymore. It belonged to the truth. The camera stayed locked on Denzel and the survivors long after Trump had slumped back in his chair, a shadow of the man who once thrived on chaos. This was no longer a debate. It was a reckoning. In living rooms across the country, people sat frozen, replaying the moment when Denzel's words cut through decades of silence. History won't remember the noise. It will remember the truth. That line ricocheted through social media, news tickers, podcasts. It became more than a quote. It became a verdict. By dawn, headlines screamed the shift: survivors stand tall, Trump shrinks. Hashtags surged, hashtag truth over noise, hashtag voices won. Teachers played the clip in classrooms. Parents shared it with their kids. Survivors of other silenced tragedies wrote, "For the first time, I feel seen." In Washington, the fallout was immediate. Lawmakers who once whispered their doubts now spoke aloud, emboldened. Editorials called it "the night power changed hands," not to another politician, but to the people. And through it all, Denzel stayed steady. No gloating, no victory lap. Just presence. Just clarity. He knew this wasn't about him. It was about every person who had been told their pain was inconvenient, their truth too disruptive. Tonight, the tide had shifted in their favor. As the crowd filed out, a survivor approached Denzel quietly. Her voice shook as she whispered, "For years, I thought my story didn't matter. Tonight, you proved it does." Denzel placed a hand over his heart, looked her in the eye, and said softly, "It always did. Tonight, the world just caught up." And with that, the story was sealed. Not as a clash of egos, not as another viral fight, but as a turning point, a moment where courage broke the noise, and truth finally stood taller than power. In a world drowning in noise, tonight proved something undeniable: truth doesn't need permission to speak, and dignity doesn't ask for approval to exist. Denzel didn't just confront Trump, he reminded us all that silence in the face of cruelty is complicity. The survivors stood tall, the nation listened, and history will not forget this moment.